On the deserted coast of Cumberland Island in the state of Georgia, where the ocean wind intertwines with the smell of salt and rotting wood, stands the skeleton of former grandeur. This is not ancient Roman ruins, nor the remnants of a medieval castle, although their scale could mislead any traveler. Here, among the dense thickets of oaks draped with Spanish moss, wild horses graze on the grass, where once, to the sounds of an orchestra, the finest crystal of the United States of America chimed. These are the ruins of Dungeness, a place that was meant to become paradise on earth but turned into a monument to human pride and the fragility of life. If you approach closer to the charred brick walls that still rise 4 stories high, you will feel not just the cold of the stone, but the weight of an unspoken history. Most people, upon hearing the name Carnegie, instantly picture Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate, philanthropist, the man whose name is carved on the pediments of libraries and concert halls around the world. But these ruins do not belong to Andrew. This story is about another Carnegie, about a man who preferred to remain in the shadows to build his own world, but paid the highest price for it. Thomas Morrison Carnegie, the younger brother, quiet strategist, financial genius, without whom the Carnegie Steel Empire might have collapsed before it even began. While Andrew was the face of the company, its voice and its public charisma, Thomas was its brain and its brakes. It was Thomas who turned his older brother's bold dreams into dry profit figures. But being the shadow of the richest man in the world is a heavy burden. In the early 80s of the 19th century, Thomas, tired of Pittsburgh's industrial smog and the endless race for capital, made a decision that surprised many. He did not build another palace on Fifth Avenue in New York to compete with the Vanderbilts. He did not go to Newport. Instead, he looked to the wild, isolated South. In 1881, Thomas Carnegie and his wife Lucy acquire land on Cumberland Island. This was a strange choice for people of their status. The island was wild, hard to access, full of alligators and venomous snakes. But it was precisely this that attracted Thomas. He needed not a stage for social receptions, but a fortress, a refuge, a place where the name Carnegie would mean simply family, not corporation. He bought this plot from Confederate General William Davis, and this fact alone already laid the foundation for conflict. Money from the industrial North was buying out the heritage of the aristocratic South. Thomas envisioned building a house that would become a family nest for his 9 children for centuries to come. He named it Dungeness, inheriting the name from the house of Revolutionary War hero Nathaniel Greene that had stood here before. But Thomas did not simply want to restore the old. He planned to erect a structure that would eclipse everything these lands had ever seen. It seemed impossible that this reserved, always serious man, accustomed to counting every cent in steel production, would suddenly embark on such extravagance. The project was colossal. Thomas hired the best architects to create an autonomous state on the island. Here there were to be its own power stations, its own farms, its own rules. This was an attempt to create a utopia, secluded from the rest of the world by the strait and the ocean. Thomas poured his entire soul into this house, the one he so carefully hid from business partners. He dreamed of growing old here, gazing at the ocean, of his children managing this estate, free from the smoke of Pennsylvania factories. By 1884, construction was in full swing. Walls were rising, towers reaching for the sky, and the outlines of the dream were becoming reality. Thomas, who had just turned over 40, felt that he was finally creating something that belonged only to him. Not to the Carnegie brothers, but to Thomas personally. But in this race to create an eternal home, he overlooked one detail that cannot be bought for any money. None of those around, seeing this palace grow, suspected that the clock had already begun its countdown. Fate was preparing a scenario in which the grandeur of the architecture would become mere decoration for a devastating human tragedy. No one knew that the master of this castle had less time allotted than it would take for the garden around the house to fully bloom, and no one could foresee that it was precisely this isolation, which Thomas so sought, that would become a curse for his descendants. We stand at the threshold of a history where gold meets ashes. To understand the true meaning of the Dungeness ruins, we must for a moment leave the humid heat of Georgia and transport ourselves to the grey, damp cobblestones of Dunfermline, Scotland. Thomas Carnegie was not born in silks, but in the dust of a weaver's cottage in 1843. This is the very key that unlocks the door to his psychology. The Carnegies were not aristocrats. They were refugees of the Industrial Revolution, fleeing hunger. When the family arrived in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, in 1848, they had nothing but their accents and desperation. This trauma of poverty gave rise to two completely different reactions in the Carnegie brothers. Andrew became a showman, an eternal optimist who believed he could sell anything to anyone. But Thomas learned to count. He learned that survival depends not on applause, but on the ledger book. While Andrew charmed Wall Street, it was Thomas who sat in the back room, meticulously studying contracts, cutting costs, and securing loans. He was the anchor for Andrew's sales. Without Thomas, the Star-Spangled Scot, as the older brother was called, would probably have gone bankrupt a dozen times. Thomas's philosophy was simple but harsh. Control the variables. If you don't control the resource, you are vulnerable. It was this approach, cold, calculating, devoid of sentimentality, that allowed the brothers to build Carnegie Steel. But wealth brought a new conflict. By the 1880s, the brothers were rich beyond the comprehension of ordinary people, true captains of the Gilded Age. However, Thomas remained an outsider. In the rigid hierarchy of Victorian society, they were still nouveau riche, people with dirty hands despite millions in the banks. New York's old money looked down on the steel barons, and here lies the root of the Dungeness project. Thomas did not want to play by the rules of Manhattan's elite clubs. He wanted to write his own rules. His purchase of land on Cumberland Island in 1881 for $35,000 was a strategic masterclass, typical of his business mind. He did not just buy a vacation home, he bought a kingdom. He acquired the land from the fading aristocracy of the South, effectively replacing the old feudal lords with a new industrial monarchy. It was a conquest. But unlike his factories, this was personal. Thomas, a man of silence and calculation, looked at these wild shores and saw a chance to build a legacy that would not depend on fluctuations in steel prices. He saw permanence. He saw a place where the chaos of the world he himself helped build could not touch him. But, as history often shows, the architect striving to control everything around him is often the least prepared for the chaos within his own biology. But no king rules alone, and no empire is built solely on accounting reports. If Thomas was the brain of the operation, then its steel backbone became the woman who entered his life not as a shadow, but as an equal player, Lucy Coleman. In the world of Victorian patriarchy, her role could easily be reduced to the function of hearth-keeper, but that would be a historical mistake. Lucy was the daughter of William Coleman, a coal and iron magnate, a man whose mines fueled Pennsylvania's Industrial Revolution. Their marriage to Thomas in 1866 became not just a union of two hearts, but a strategic merger of capitals and influence. This was the very hook that finally transformed Thomas's position. Through this marriage, he ceased to be just a poor immigrant who had made good. He became part of the industrial aristocracy. It was precisely this union of two powerful families, the Carnegies and the Colemans, that found its physical embodiment in the project on Cumberland Island. When they stepped onto the shore, a picture full of melancholy and wild beauty presented itself before them. The remains of General Nathaniel Greene's old mansion, burned and swallowed by the subtropical forest. This was a symbol of the fallen South, the aristocracy washed away by the wave of history. Thomas and Lucy did not restore the past. They decided to build a new future on its bones. This was the perfect merging of worlds. Money from the industrial North, earned on steel and smoke, was to erect a monument on the lands of the agrarian South, where time seemed to have stopped. The construction of Dungeness became a logistical feat bordering on madness. Imagine the scale. To an isolated island, accessible only by water, thousands of tons of brick, marble, glass, and rare woods needed to be delivered. Barges loaded with materials came from Fernandina Beach, navigating the treacherous currents of the strait. Thomas hired the best craftsmen to bring to life the Queen Anne architectural style, but with elements of Scottish baronial severity, a tribute to their roots. This was not a light and airy beach house. This was a fortress. The walls began to rise in 1884, and every stone laid was a statement. Thomas was building a house that would combine the incompatible, the wild, untamed nature of the island with the latest achievements of civilization. While alligators basked in the sun in the swamps just 100 yards from the construction site, engineers were designing plumbing and electricity systems that did not yet exist even in many American cities. This was a paradox frozen in stone, an attempt to impose iron order on the chaos of the jungles. For Thomas, this house was becoming something more than just a place of rest. It was the materialization of his success, proof that the quiet brother was capable of creating a world where he was the absolute sovereign. Lucy saw in this house a future for their 9 children, a safe harbor, remote from the temptations and dangers of big cities. They were creating their own Eden, but, as in the biblical story, a fruit was already ripening in this garden that they were destined to taste with bitterness. As the walls of Dungeness grew higher, blocking the horizon, Thomas began to feel that his own vital energy was draining into these bricks, as if the house demanded a sacrifice for its grandeur. When the scaffolding was removed and Dungeness finally stood before its creator in 1885, it was not just a building. It was a psychological portrait of Thomas Carnegie, cast in brick and terracotta. To understand the scale of the quiet brother's ambitions, one must mentally walk through the grand doors of this colossus. The first thing that caught the eye was not gold, but overwhelming solidity. The main tower soared into the sky for 100 feet, 30 meters of pure dominance over the island's flat landscape. From its summit, one could see not only the ocean, but anyone who dared approach the Carnegie holdings. This was architecture of control. Inside the house were 59 rooms, each serving a specific purpose in the family's complex ecosystem. If outside the house resembled a Scottish castle with its turrets and steep roofs, inside reigned a Victorian obsession with order and separation. The huge hall, paneled in dark oak, greeted guests with the scent of beeswax and old Europe. Here, light fell through tall windows in such a way as to emphasize the massiveness of the staircase, the house's backbone, along which servants moved as invisible shadows. Every detail of the interior screamed Thomas's values, quality over shine. The fireplaces, of which there were 16 in the house, were large enough to accommodate whole tree trunks, warming the vast halls during humid winter evenings. The dining room was a stage for a performance where the main role was played, not by food, but by hierarchy. Here, at the mahogany table, 20 people could be seated, and the clink of silver utensils drowned out the sound of the surf beyond the windows. But the most interesting thing was hidden not in the grand halls, but in the lungs of this organism. Dungeness was a marvel of engineering. Thomas, true to his industrial nature, did not trust local conditions. He built an autonomous life support system. The island got its own power station, at a time when many districts of New York were still lit by gas. An ice factory was built so that in the subtropical heat of Georgia, cold always chimed in the glasses. Artesian wells pumped the purest water. This was a triumph of man over nature. The house was served by an army of 200 people, from liveried foot. This was the moment of truth that split the history of Dungeness into before and after. Thomas's death was supposed to mark the end of this extravagant experiment. The logic of the time dictated a single scenario. The young widow, Lucy Coleman Carnegie, left with 9 children on her hands in the wild wilderness, was supposed to sell the estate, pack her things, and return to the civilized world of Pittsburgh or New York. The island was too harsh, maintaining the house too expensive, and the memories too painful. Advisors, lawyers, family, everyone expected retreat. But it was precisely here, at her husband's grave, that a transformation occurred, changing the genre of this story from a family saga to a psychological thriller. Lucy Carnegie did not weep into her handkerchief, awaiting rescue. She looked at the empire that Thomas had built and made a decision bordering on obsession. She not only refused to sell Dungeness, she decided to expand it. At this moment, the viewer must feel the deep moral ambivalence of what was happening. Was it an act of the greatest love and devotion to her husband's memory? Or was it a manifestation of rigid selfishness, an attempt to control her children's lives by locking them in a golden cage on an isolated island? Lucy takes the reins of power into her own hands with an iron grip worthy of any steel magnate. She transforms into a matriarch whose word is law. But her main weapon was not architectural, but legal. Lucy creates a complex trust fund. The terms of this document were harsh. The island and the house could not be sold or divided until the last of her children died. Ponder this fatalism. She legally bound the fates of 9 people and their future families to this piece of land in the middle of the ocean. Dungeness ceased to be just a house. It turned into a fortress of memory where time was to freeze. Lucy hired architects to further expand the mansion, bringing its area to 37,000 square feet. She built new wings, pools, and gardens, as if trying to fill the void left by Thomas's death with cubic meters of concrete and marble. But behind this grandeur hid the tragedy of the children. They grew up as princes and princesses in their own kingdom, detached from reality, rich but deprived of freedom of choice. The island became their world, and Dungeness their magnificent prison. Here we see the paradox of the Carnegie success. Resources that should have given freedom were used to create shackles. Lucy perhaps believed that she was saving the family from the decay of the outside world. But in reality, she was creating an incubator for future conflicts. With each new building constructed, with each servant hired, the tension between the desire to live one's own life and the duty to preserve the legacy grew. Thomas wanted a refuge. Lucy built a dynastic mausoleum in which the living were to exist by the rules of the dead. And while the widow, clad in black, walked her domains, somewhere in the foundation of this grandeur, invisible cracks had already begun to appear, foreshadowing the inevitable collapse. In 1916, the heart of Dungeness stopped. Lucy Carnegie died. The iron fist that held the clan together unclenched, and the trust conceived as protection instantly turned into a noose. The heirs, shackled by legal chains, discovered the terrible truth. Maintaining a feudal palace in the era of the Great Depression, jazz, and new taxes was not a privilege, but financial suicide. The illusion of eternity collapsed. By 1925, the family leaves the island. The huge house, where crystal once chimed and the fates of millions of dollars were decided, sinks into deafening silence. For 34 years, Dungeness stood as a ghost. the jungles slowly reclaimed their own. Roots cracked the foundation, vines strangled the columns, and in the empty ballrooms, only the salty wind wandered. This was a painful limbo. The house was too large to live in, but too expensive to let simply disappear. The tension between past grandeur and the reality of decay demanded a radical resolution. The denouement came on June 24th, 1959. The night was torn by flames visible for miles from the mainland. Fire. History whispers that it was no accident. The main version is revenge by a local poacher whose leg was shot by the estate caretaker for illegal hunting. The fire, like a predator, devoured the precious oak panels, melted the Tiffany-stained glass, and collapsed the floors, destroying everything that symbolized material wealth. But it was precisely this fire that accomplished the great transformation. It freed the family. Burned, the house ceased to be a demanding monster sucking resources. It was purified to the skeleton. Thomas's ambitions and Lucy's total control turned to ashes, leaving behind only the tragic beauty of bare brick walls. The fire destroyed the roof, but opened the sky, turning private property into an eternal monument to transience, where money no longer holds sway. Today, the ruins of Dungeness stand not as a monument to wealth, but as a majestic temple of humility. What Thomas Carnegie built as a fortress protecting from the chaos of the outside world ultimately became part of the landscape. Wild horses, direct descendants of the family's elite steeds, now roam freely where once the finest porcelain chimed and the fates of the steel industry were discussed. Nature, which the Carnegies tried to tame with manicured lawns, geometry, and imported marble, returned and gently but insistently reclaimed its own. Vines became new tapestries, and the starry sky of the south the only ceiling of the great hall. In this finale, there is a profound irony worthy of Fitzgerald's pen. Like the Great Gatsby, Thomas Carnegie believed he could rewrite reality with the force of will and vast capital. He believed it was possible to build paradise and lock it away, barricading himself from time. But the story of Dungeness teaches us otherwise. True legacy is not what we build from stone, trying to immortalize our name, but what remains when ambitions depart. The fire of '59 did not destroy the essence of this place. It paradoxically saved it, cleansing it of the weight of human pride and turning private property into a human heritage. For us, people of the 21st century, obsessed with success, control, and asset accumulation, these charred walls serve as a silent mirror. We all build our little Dungenesses, careers, statuses, digital empires, hoping to find security and immortality. But look into these empty window sockets. They do not frighten. On the contrary, they liberate. They remind us that total control is an illusion, and life is not what we clench in our fist, but what happens when we unclench our fingers. Andrew Carnegie, the loud brother, left the world libraries and concert halls, institutions for the mind. Thomas, the quiet brother, despite his desire to hide away, left us, perhaps, a more important lesson. These ruins, a place for the soul and silence. Standing here today, under the rustle of palms and the eternal roar of the Atlantic, one understands this is the true finale of any great ambition, not to conquer time, but to surrender to it beautifully, leaving behind a trace that, even in ruin, continues to awe with its tragic beauty. The story is complete. The fire is out. Only eternity remains,